Intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Elaine, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the January 17th, 18th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And from the front page, voters are unhappy about Trump's economy. The president is focusing on foreign affairs at expense of rising prices, a poll finds. It's President Trump's economy now, and voters are increasingly unhappy with how he's handling it. By 15 percentage points, more voters in a new Wall Street Journal poll rate the economy as weak rather than strong, a deterioration from July when negative views predominated by 4 points. About half of voters say the economy has gotten worse in the past year, compared with 35% who see improvement. That finding continues a years-long disconnect between traditional measures of inflation and economic growth, which are relatively positive, and a negative public outlook. Those are among the warning signs for the president and the Republican Party in the poll, which find voters think Trump is focusing on foreign affairs and other matters at the expense of their most pressing concerns, rising prices and the overall economy. Still, support for Trump among his most loyal supporters remains resilient, limiting damage to his political standing from the sour view of his economic management. Some 92% of people who voted for him in 2024 gave him a positive job rating today, including 70% who strongly approve, the Journal poll finds. Overall, the poll offers cautions for Trump and the GOP as the nation heads toward House and Senate elections late in the year. While 45% of voters approve of the president's job performance, 54% disapprove, a 9-point gap compared with 6 points in the last Journal survey in July. Despite a recent flurry of affordability proposals from the president, more voters disapprove than approve of his handling of inflation by 17 percentage points, a worse showing than the 11-point gap in July. By 10 percentage points, more voters were disapprove than approved of his handling of the economy. As a candidate, Trump had set high expectations among voters that he would improve their economic lives, said John Anzalone, a Democratic pollster who conducted the survey with Republican Adam Geller. Now, Anzalone said, he's basically turning his biggest strength, I'm the guy who can fix the economy because I was a business guy, into his biggest weakness. People don't think he's making the economy a priority. Trump said he's inherited a mess from his predecessor, but 58% of voters said that Trump's policies were most responsible for the current economy, while 31% said that former President Joe Biden's policies were responsible. And many voters in the survey think Trump has distracted himself from what's most important. Majorities say that they disapprove when asked whether Trump has the right priorities, is looking out for middle-class families, or cares about people like you. Asked about the president's attention to Venezuela, Greenland, and other countries, a 53% majority says he's focusing on unnecessary foreign matters at the expense of the economy, while 42% say he's working on urgent national security threats. Geller said that Trump had accomplished the important political goal of holding support from his base, noting that 59% his 59% job approval rating among blue-collar voters, who are important in many House and Senate battlegrounds. Now, Geller says, Trump is trying to win over independent and swing voters with affordability proposals, such as limiting large investor purchases of homes and attempt to ease housing costs. That's not showing up in polls yet, but this is a president who is clearly engaged in tackling issues that are important, not only to his base, Geller said. It's unclear whether Trump would need or could obtain congressional approval for many of his plans. The survey found a modest 4-point lead for Democrats when voters were asked which party they expected to back for Congress next year, with 47% say they support a Democratic candidate and 43% a Republican. Democrats often need a larger lead on that question to produce big gains in House races, due in part to the way voters are distributed across House districts. The last time Trump faced a midterm election in 2018, Democrats held leads of between 6 and 10 points at about this time in the cycle, Journal polling found. The party gained some 40 House seats that year. Republicans currently hold a 5-seat majority. The Democratic Party is contending with a badly tarnished image, making it hard for it to capitalize on any GOP weaknesses. Some 58% of voters have an unfavorable view of the party, compared with 39% who hold a favorable view. That's marginally better for the Democrats than in July, when the party recorded its weakest image rating over the Journal polls dating back more than 30 years. Negative views of the party now outweigh positive ones by 19%, compared with an 11-point gap for Republican Party. Our branding is still as bad as it's ever been, said Anzalone, the Democratic pollster. By several measures, the poll shows that even while many voters disapprove of Trump's economic management, they don't see the Democrats as a better alternative. The poll was conducted January 8th through 13th and included 1,500 registered voters. The margin of error for the poll sample is plus or minus 2.5 percentage points. And this article is named Insurrection Act is Broad and Seldom Used. President Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in the wake of widening protests over immigration enforcement in Minnesota and last week's fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent. The 19th century law would allow Trump to deploy military inside the U.S. It would be the first use of the emergency federal power for domestic law enforcement in over 3 decades. Here's what to know about the law. The Insurrection Act is a law that authorizes the president to use military force for civilian law enforcement in the U.S. in a narrow set of circumstances. It is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act that typically places strict limits on how federal forces can be used on U.S. soil. It permits calling in federal forces whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impossible to enforce laws through normal judicial procedures. It also allows Trump to use the military when an insurrection or similar action deprives someone of a constitutional right and state authorities don't remedy the situation. He can also send in federal forces, the law says, when such a group, quote, opposes or obstructs the execution of laws of the United States or impedes the course of justice under those laws, end quote. The law as written is extremely broad, and many of the terms it uses don't have concrete definitions, said Laura Dickinson, a professor at George Washington University's law school. Nevertheless, she said, it's been interpreted by both parties for centuries as a final resort emergency option to be used only when law and order has completely broken down. If it were invoked now, we would be in uncharted waters, Dickinson said. Has Trump invoked this law before? No. Trump considered using the Insurrection Act in 2020 to quell protests over the death of George Floyd, but faced pushback from within his administration. He ultimately decided against it. The Insurrection Act has been invoked only a few dozen times in U.S. history, according to Brennan Center for Justice, a public policy think tank. It was most recently used by President George H.W. Bush in 1992 at the request of California's governor to aid with civil unrest over the acquittal of 4 Los Angeles police officers in the beating of Rodney King. So far, Trump has used other legal justifications for sending National Guard troops to U.S. cities. Those troops haven't been exempt from Posse Comitatus, meaning they are largely barred from conducting law enforcement operations. Trump was able to deploy the National Guard in Washington, D.C. because the city is under federal control. In Los Angeles, he cited the threat posed to federal buildings and personnel. In December, Trump said he would end National Guard deployments in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Portland, Oregon, following months-long legal battles with the Democratic-led cities. Any invocation of the act will almost certainly be challenged in court. It will raise several questions, including how much deference the courts should give to the president's interpretation of the situation on the ground. While the act is historically understood as a last-ditch tool for absolute emergencies, such as when law cannot be carried out because courts have been forced to close, the Trump administration is likely to argue, as has in similar cases, that the courts don't have the authority to second-guess the president's judgment. The law's vague language will also play a key role, said Dickinson, the law professor. Some experts say the lack of a clear definition for terms like rebellion will grant the president wide discretion. Others say that invoking it under these conditions so deeply contradicts the Act's principles that it is unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. Harold Honjong Ko, a Yale Law School professor, said a use of the Act in these circumstances so plainly violates the idea of the law that any ambiguity in the wording wouldn't be enough for Trump administration to prevail. The entire thing is antithetical to the history and tradition of the Constitution, which is what the Supreme Court cares so much about, he said. Would federal troops police Americans? While the Act suspends posse comitatus, it doesn't necessarily mean that the National Guard or armed forces would involve themselves directly in law enforcement. The military hasn't been trained to police Americans and traditionally has been vehemently opposed to the idea of doing so. And the plan aims to let homebuyers tap 401ks for down payments. President Trump will issue a plan next week for letting Americans tap their 401k retirement accounts for a down payment on a home, a senior White House official said on Friday. The latest in a series of proposals floated by the administration to address persistent anxiety over the cost of living. Kevin Hassett, director of National Economic Council, said on Fox Business that Trump would put the plan out in the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland next week. Hassett said the mechanics of how the plan would work were still being discussed and offered few details on how it would differ from current options people have. Davis Engel, the White House spokesman, didn't provide any additional detail on the forthcoming proposal. The administration is committed to exploring every tool possible to deliver for the American people, he said. First-time homebuyers under the age of 59 and a half can currently take up to $10,000 out of their individual retirement accounts penalty-free for a home purchase. But such early withdrawals aren't allowed in 401ks and similar employer-based accounts unless people pay a 10% penalty. Trump has been issuing a barrage of proposals to address Americans' cost of living, with many of his calls focused on the housing affordability crisis. The proposals have included directing government-backed mortgage finance companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy $200 billion in mortgage bonds in an effort to lower rates for home buyers. Many of Trump's ideas would likely require legislation, and the rules for 401k and IRA withdrawals are laid out in tax code. Changing that could be an uphill climb in the closely divided Congress, and GOP lawmakers have been divided about whether to pursue a major single-party fiscal bill this year. The government already allows penalty-free early withdrawals before age 59 and a half from retirement accounts for certain reasons, such as disability and college and some medical expenses. People who take such withdrawals from pre-tax retirement accounts still have to pay income tax on the money, but can avoid a 10% penalty. Most 401k plans also let employees borrow from their accounts for any reason, including for a home purchase. One big advantage of taking out a 401k loan is that the worker has to repay the money to themselves with interest, so their retirement savings won't suffer a permanent reduction. Nearly 15% of participants in 401k accounts administered by Vanguard Group had a loan outstanding at the end of 2024. The administration's proposal could help people who feel they can't afford to repay a 401k loan get access to capital for a down payment. Hassett on Friday also signaled that the White House was backing off Trump's call for a one-year 10% cap on credit card interest rates after GOP leaders were cool to the idea. Instead, he speculated that banks would voluntarily provide Trump cards without offering details. The housing market has been frozen for 3 straight years as high home prices have elevated mortgage rates have made purchases unaffordable for many Americans. About 30% of first-time buyers said saving for a down payment was one of the most difficult parts of their home purchase, according to National Association of Realtors survey released last year. About 22% of first-time buyers surveyed said they used a gift or loan from a relative or a friend for their down payment. The biggest problem for housing market affordability is a shortage of homes that buyers can afford. Some housing economists warn that without an increase in housing supply, government policies that increase demand could push home prices even higher. It's unclear whether Trump's proposal would allow someone taking a 401k withdrawal for a home down payment to repay the money into the account over time. Hassett said one possibility is that a homeowner could put 10% of the equity of their home into their 401k account and have it grow during their working years. Employer-based retirement plans typically have a menu of investment options that doesn't include personal home equity. Congress has repeatedly made it easier to raid 401k accounts. In recent years, it began allowing people to take penalty-free withdrawals for reasons including terminal illness and recovering from a federally declared disaster. Those exceptions can work at cross purposes with the idea of tax-advantaged retirement accounts, which are designed to set money aside for decades of tax-deferred growth. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And also in U.S. news, wage garnishment for student loans delayed. Education officials had recently warned defaulted borrowers of January notice. The Education Department said Friday it would delay its plans to garnish the pay of defaulted student loan borrowers. The delay will allow the agency time to implement changes that will give borrowers more options to repay their loans, the department said. The department had said last month that it planned to start garnishing the pay of defaulted borrowers, with notices set to start going out in early January. President Trump more recently has been issuing proposals aimed at addressing affordability, with Americans pressured by persistent inflation and a weakening job market. On Friday, a senior White House official said Trump will issue a plan next week that would let people use their 401k retirement accounts for down payment on a home. No details were provided on how the plan would differ from people's current options. The Trump administration has been urging federal student loan borrowers back into repayment after an extended forbearance period that started during the pandemic. The break ended in 2024 after an on-ramp period last year. Borrowers who missed student loan payments saw their credit score take a hit. More than 3 million federal student loan borrowers recently fell into default status, meaning they haven't made payments in more than 270 days, and many more were seriously delinquent on payments, according to the Education Department data. Millions more borrowers haven't made a student loan payment in nearly a year. On Friday, the Education Department encouraged borrowers to explore options for resolving their defaulted student loans and noted it reports defaulted loans to credit reporting agencies. Federal student loan borrowers who haven't made payments in more than 360 days could see up to 15% of their wages automatically deducted from paychecks. The government can also withhold money from borrowers' tax refunds and other federal benefits. This month, a group of organizations, including the NAACP, National Education Association, the Student Debt Crisis Center, called on Washington to halt wage garnishment, saying it would add another burden to people struggling to repay their student loans and other bills. And in public health, caution urged as flu moderates. The flu season appears to be waning, with 2 straight weeks of decline in measures of flu activity. The latest governmental data indicate the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention posted numbers for flu activity through last week that showed a big drop in flu hospitalizations and a smaller but significant decrease in medical office visits due to flu-like illnesses. The number of states reporting high flu activity also fell from 44 to 36. Meanwhile, there haven't been large surges in 2 winters and 2 other winter threats, COVID-19 and RSV. CDC officials are calling the current respiratory virus season moderate, but that doesn't mean the season is over, especially for the flu. Second surges in flu activity often occur after the winter holidays. We've had other seasons where we've had a peak, it's gone down, and then we've nonetheless had a prolonged season, said Dr. William Schaffner, an infectious disease specialist at Vanderbilt University. And in Supreme Court, justices will hear the Bayer challenge. A high court agreed to hear Bayer's challenge to Roundup litigation, giving the company new hope in its effort to repel tens of thousands of claims that its flagship weed killer causes cancer. The court said it would take up an appeal from the German company, which had petitioned the court last year. Bayer argues that consumers shouldn't be able to sue the company for failing to warn about cancer risks because U.S. federal regulators have determined Roundup's main chemical ingredient doesn't require a cancer warning. Bayer has been embroiled in litigation surrounding Roundup, the most widely used weed killer in the world, since its $63 billion acquisition of Monsanto in 2018. Monsanto developed the herbicide as well as crop seeds genetically engineered to withstand it. The Supreme Court will likely hear arguments in the case this spring, with a ruling expected by early July. If Bayer prevails, it could help lead to the dismissal of thousands of cases against the company. And tight inventories and cold boost Europe gas prices. European natural gas prices extended this past week's rally on expectations of another late-month cold snap boosting heating demand, while inventories remained well below historical averages. In Friday trading, the Dutch TTF benchmark climbed 13% to 37.48 euros, which is $43.47 a megawatt hour, for a weekly gain of nearly 30%. The prospect of cold weather has provided a boost to prices, said Hamad Hussein of Capital Economics. Short covering by speculative investors may have also helped to exacerbate the scale of price moves. Europe has seen accelerated withdrawals from its storage facilities in recent days, leaving inventories less than 52% full compared with a 5-year average of 67%. Meanwhile, colder conditions in Asia have already lifted spot market activity, raising concerns over increased competition for liquefied natural gas cargoes. Icy Siberian air is forecast to sweep the continent, pushing heating demand higher and potentially intensifying global competition for LNG cargoes, analysts at ANZ Research said. Asia is also bracing for a blast of cold weather. Temperatures in Beijing and Shanghai could plunge as much as 20 degrees Celsius by midweek, while Japan issued a nationwide warning for very low temperatures. European gas prices rose earlier this past week on concerns over a potential interruption of Iran's pipeline gas flows to Turkey due to growing unrest in the country, breaking a months-long trend of muted trading within a range of 27 to 30 euros a megawatt hour. The rally marks a significant shift in the market after strong heating demand collided with a renewed geopolitical risk, energy analysts at DNB Carnegie said. At the end of last year, confidence in the region's supply cushion, helped by LNG imports and a mild start to winter, drove net short positions in European gas to the most bearish levels since early 2020. Those fears have since eased as expectations of imminent U.S. military action against Iran subsided, reducing the geopolitical risk premium. However, investment funds have already reduced their net short in TTF to 55.14 terawatt hours from 92.76 terawatt hours in mid-December, according to ING Commodity Strategies. And in opinion, Martin Luther King's game theory. I grew up in the Dallas suburb of Louisville when it had more gun racks than yoga mats. In elementary school, I was one of 2 black kids in the entire building. It was the early 1980s. Faded Wranglers, girls in leg warmers, boys with bowl cuts shaped by their mothers at the kitchen table. Our classroom smelled faintly of pencil shavings and cafeteria biscuits. Every February, Black History Month arrived with a tone shift. Voices softened, smiles lingered a bit too long. One morning in my homeroom, The teacher asked what a harvest moon was. My hand shot up when I remembered. It isn't only the question, it's the reaction after I answered it correctly. The nodding, the approving murmurs, the looks that said it was amazing I could read at all. That was when I started to hate February. A few years later, I was bused across town to a much worse and much more diverse middle school. Februaries came in hot. I learned about Malcolm X, Black Power, systemic oppression, and a version of history that treated anger as authenticity and restraint as weakness. It was also where my youthful hostility toward Martin Luther King Jr. crystallized. To my pre-adolescent mind, King was soft. All he did, I argued, was to get beaten up and thrown in jail. My knucklehead uncle did that too. One February afternoon, I told my social studies teacher that King wasn't a real hero, that he was weak, and that Black History Month should focus on someone else like Mary McLeod Bethune. I spent the rest of the month in detention. With the benefit of time and a bit of economic theory, I came to realize that my youthful view of Martin Luther King was exactly backward. He wasn't weak. He was a brilliant social strategist. To see why, it helps to think of civil rights movement in terms of game theory, as an effort to move America from a bad equilibrium to a better one. Start with simple race game. On one side, there are Black Americans seeking equal rights. On the other is a white political establishment, local authorities, courts, police departments, and the broader electorate that ultimately constrains them. The objective isn't catharsis or moral victory, it's policy change. The difficulty is that neither side knows the other's true intentions. There are hidden types on both sides. Among Black protesters are those seeking peaceful inclusion and those with a taste for violence and disorder. Among the white Americans are committed segregationists who will repress regardless, and others who are uneasy about oppression but uncertain about protesters' aims. No one wears a label. Everyone infers type from behavior. Multiple equilibria are possible in a game like this. In one equilibrium, the one America occupied for decades, protest is fragmented and often violent. Different leaders, organizations, and local movements press for change, but the efforts are sporadic and heterogeneous. Violence pools all protesters together, making it easy for the majority to presume the worst. In that world, repression is cheap. Even well-intentioned whites can rationalize it as restoring order. Segregationists repress eagerly. Moderates acquiesce. Inequality persists. No individual leader or individual protester can improve outcomes by behaving differently. It's bad equilibrium and it's stable. King's genius was recognizing that there was another equilibrium, and that reaching it required not only protest, but coordinated collective action and a credible, sustained commitment to nonviolence. Nonviolence is powerful not because it is passive, but because it is informative. Sustained, disciplined nonviolence is costly and hard to fake. It separates those seeking equality from those seeking chaos. By doing so, it helps outsiders distinguish between good and bad types, including, in my own case, separating the boy I was from the man I became. Once nonviolence becomes credible, repression is no longer cheap. It remains attractive for segregationists, but becomes politically costly for moderates. Reform becomes the best response. The equilibrium shifts. Seen this way, the strategy to achieve civil rights didn't assume everyone was good. It merely recognized that not everyone was bad. This framework yields clear empirical predictions, ones that line up closely with what researchers have since found. Political scientist Omar Waswo studied how civil rights protests in the 1960s affected media coverage and voting behavior. Using county-level data from 1960 to 1972, he found that areas exposed to nonviolent protests experienced a 1.6 to 2.5 percentage point increase in Democratic vote share, a meaningful shift in mid-century American politics. Party coalitions were in flux at the time, but within regions, Democratic candidates were consistently more supportive of civil rights legislation than Republicans, making county level shifts towards Democrats a reasonable indicator of rising support for civil rights. Newspaper coverage in those areas also moved towards civil rights reframing rather than public order concerns. Violent protests produced the opposite effect. When demonstrations turned violent, media coverage pivoted to law and order, and vote shares shifted toward Republican candidates. In some cases, violent unrest generated a 5-point swing toward Republicans. Same movement, same goals, completely different outcomes. None of this evidence implies that anger was illegitimate or grievances unfounded. It suggests something more uncomfortable, that how protests are conducted determines whether they clarify and ameliorate injustice or obscure and perpetuate it. This also explains King's fierce opposition to riots, even when he understood the rage behind them. A riot is the language of the unheard, he said in 1967. But he immediately added that riots were socially destructive and self-defeating. As historian David Garrow documents, King believed that violence collapsed the moral clarity of the movement depended on, allowing repression to masquerade as order. Riots were strategic failures. They destroyed the information the movement was trying to convey and pushed society back toward the bad equilibrium. This isn't just historical rationalization. The same logic applies to today's immigration protests. If the protests were disciplined and nonviolent, they could do what King's strategy was designed to do: separate types, force belief updating among moderates, and make repression politically costly. Instead, they quickly turned visibly violent, objects thrown, clashes with officers, and federal officials predictably framed the unrest as a public order problem, even raising the possibility of invoking the Insurrection Act. This is exactly the kind of situation where the informational structure collapses, the movement gets pulled into a bad type, and law and order becomes the dominant frame. Does thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. as a game theorist sound far-fetched? Consider Selma. King didn't march because Selma was unique. He marched because it was predictable. He understood the type distribution he faced. There were both enough segregationists willing to use force and enough moderates watching from a distance that a peaceful attempt to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge would force a choice. If authorities showed restraint, the protest would continue. If they used violence, responsibility would be unmistakable. Either way, the signal would be clear. The same logic guided Birmingham. King chose it not because it was the worst city in the South, but because Bull Connor was reliable. Connor's overreaction, police dogs, fire hoses, mass arrests, wasn't a surprise. That was the point. Nonviolence ensured that when repression came, it would reveal rather than obscure. King wasn't alone in seeing the problem this way. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Nelson Mandela in South Africa deployed disciplined nonviolence, chosen not because violence was unthinkable, but because repression was predictable. In each case, the goal was the same: to force authorities to reveal themselves, update beliefs among moderates, and make reform the least costly response, even if institutional change took far longer. Where there were enough citizens on the margin, the strategy eventually worked. Where there wasn't, most famously at Tiananmen Square, it failed. When I was young, I mistook restraint for weakness and anger for honesty. What I failed to see, and what we still fail to teach students, was that Martin Luther King wasn't avoiding conflict. He was engineering it on terms that made progress possible. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we should continue to honor a moral leader, but we should also recognize a brilliant social strategist who understood signaling equilibrium long before economists ever coined the term. He had a dream, and he had an optimal strategy for realizing it. And this article is by Roland Fryer, a journal contributor and professor of economics at Harvard. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And in sports, the Los Angeles Dodgers' $240 million show of force. With the threat of a work stoppage looming, the two-time defending World Series champions just made outfielder Kyle Tucker the highest paid player in the history of baseball. If there were still any doubts that Major League Baseball was hurtling toward a labor meltdown next winter, they were obliterated on Thursday night. That's because the Los Angeles Dodgers, the two-time defending World Series champion, with the most expensive roster ever assembled, somehow found even more cash to spend in a wallet that appears to have no bottom. They agreed with star outfielder Kyle Tucker on a 4-year contract worth an astounding $240 million. A stunning deal that now has 29 other teams all asking the same question: can the Dodgers possibly be stopped? At this point, it's almost impossible to see how. The Dodgers paid more than $500 million last season between payroll and luxury tax penalties, inspiring increasingly loud calls among franchise owners and fans for the new rules to rein them in. Then, this offseason, they committed another $309 million to bring in Tucker and top closer Edwin Diaz, almost as if to taunt their rivals. The addition of Tucker was especially brazen. Even with $30 million deferred, Tucker is now the highest paid player in the Major League Baseball history by average salary, with the net present value of his deal coming in at $57 million a year. That far surpasses the previous record set by Juan Soto, whose $765 million pact with the New York Mets nets him $51 million annually. Shohei Ohtani's heavily deferred contract with the Dodgers is worth $46 million a year. The crazy part is that Tucker is far from the best player in baseball, despite his unprecedented compensation. In fact, he isn't even the best player in his own lineup, or the second best, or maybe even the third best. The Dodgers also have Ohtani, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman. But he was the best free agent slugger available on the market this winter, a 4-time All-Star who has averaged 27 home runs a year the past 5 seasons. Tucker, who turns 29 on Saturday, rarely strikes out for a hitter with his power, making him one of the game's most well-rounded offensive threats. Los Angeles didn't need him, but that hardly mattered. The Dodgers acquired him anyway. Tucker's presence gives them an even better chance to become the first team to win 3 straight titles since the New York Yankees from 1998 to 2000. The Dodgers can operate this way because under ownership of Guggenheim Partners CEO Mark Walter, they have developed into a financial powerhouse unlike anything baseball has ever seen. They have led MLB in attendance in each of the past 12 seasons. They earn more sponsorship revenue than any other peers, thanks largely to Ohtani's unrivaled popularity in the U.S. and Japan. And at the time when cable television business is collapsing in many markets, the Dodgers have a blockbuster TV deal that will pay them more than $330 million a year through 2038. Put it all together, and the modern Dodgers have found a way to make the evil Empire Yankees look downright destitute. Even the Mets' Steve Cohen, the wealthiest owner in baseball, hasn't been able to keep up with the Los Angeles and failed to bring Tucker to Queens. Cohen won't go into spring training empty-handed, though. The Mets pivoted on Friday and came to terms with infielder Bo Bichette to a 3-year, $126 million contract. Still, the Mets aren't the Dodgers. Los Angeles has 8 players with 9-figure contracts: Tucker, Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, Yamamoto, Snell, Glasnow, and catcher Will Smith. This comes at a time when baseball's future is in peril. MLB's collective bargaining agreement expires after the upcoming season. The entire industry is bracing for bitter negotiation that could result in missed games for the first time since the player strike that caused the cancellation of the 1994 World Series. In many ways, the Dodgers are the primary reason why. Management argues that the wealth gap between the clubs like the Dodgers and their small market counterparts has become an insurmountable chasm, leaving some teams unable to compete. The solution would be a salary cap in a sport that has never had any hard limits on how much teams can spend on talent. The players' union blames other owners for refusing to spend like the Dodgers and has maintained that it won't agree to a salary cap under any circumstances, raising the specter of a protracted showdown. All of that was true long before Thursday night. Then the Dodgers gave Kyle Tucker $240 million and pushed baseball closer to its breaking point. Also in sports, paying players nearly brought down Miami. The last time the University of Miami was competing for national championships, it turned out that players were being paid under the table, a revelation that touched off one of the most explosive scandals in college football history. Now, more than 2 decades later, the Hurricanes are back on the brink of a title as they prepare to take on the undefeated Indiana in the final of the college football playoff on Monday night. Once again, Miami is spending liberally on its best players. Only this time, it's completely out in the open and entirely legal. In an era where college athletes can be compensated for endorsements and even paid directly by their schools, Miami has turned into one of the nation's most aggressive and above-board spenders. The Hurricanes have payroll of about $30 million, a person familiar with the matter said, which is among the highest in the sport. That includes the $4 million spent last year to lure their star quarterback, Carson Beck, to Coral Gables from Georgia in one of the largest deals of its kind, all of which is deeply ironic considering Miami's famously checkered history of slipping cash to players. The Hurricanes were responsible for some of the most notorious pay-for-play schemes college football has ever seen. Miami's also been hugely successful, winning or sharing 5 national titles between 1983 and 2001. The Hurricanes' most recent troubles came in 2011 when a prominent booster named Nevin Shapiro said he had spent millions of dollars worth of banned payments to dozens of Miami players over many years. The situation, which included a botched NCAA investigation that helped save Miami from the most severe sanctions, eventually became a key argument in favor of wholesome reform for college sports. That reform, in turn, included the relaxing of rules banning player compensation, which helped propel the Hurricanes back to prominence. I was definitely ahead of the curve, Shapiro said in an interview. My way wasn't better, my way was illegal. Shapiro would later be sentenced to 20 years in prison for securities fraud unrelated to his activities as a Miami booster. He was transferred to home confinement in 2020 and had his sentence commuted by former President Joe Biden in 2024. But his involvement in the world of college football received a surge of attention in 2011 after he gave a series of interviews while incarcerated. During his time as Miami's rainmaker, it was against the rules for boosters to offer athletes so much as a turkey sandwich, let alone large sums of cash he was secretly funneling to players. But these days, boosters who spend even more lavishly than Shapiro routinely help athletic departments fund college athlete compensation without fear of reprisal. For plenty of programs, it's an entirely new phenomenon. At Miami, though, the practice has been part of the Hurricane history for much longer than it's been permitted by the NCAA. As Miami became the most dominant and flamboyant team in the late 1980s and early 1990s, another fan with deep pockets was a fixture on the sideline, Luther Campbell, a frontman for platinum-selling rap group 2 Live Crew. Players from those teams later said the man known as Luke Skywalker would dole out cash for big plays on the field. Campbell denied wrongdoing at the time, but on a podcast a year ago, he spoke openly about wanting to fill a financial need for Miami players. Okay, he recalled, saying, "How do I get you to perform at a certain level?" The pay-for-play, along with a slew of other allegations detailed in the NCAA infractions report, prompted a 1995 Sports Illustrated cover headlined, "Why the University of Miami Should Drop Football." But decades on from that firestorm, parts of the scandal seem downright quaint. Miami players also created their own bonus pool against college rules, according to the NCAA report. During each season from 1986 to 1992, players contributed approximately $5 to $20 to a pool of money that was collected by a defensive player for the purpose of providing cash to a selected student athlete who made the best defensive tackle during the course of a game. Today, those sums couldn't buy a fast food lunch at one of Miami's defensive linemen. Player pay is now out of the shadows, and Shapiro, who remains an avid Miami football fan, isn't particularly impressed with what's happening. His problem isn't that players can finally be paid, he says, it's that they aren't being paid enough. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And in business and finance, OpenAI to begin testing ads in ChatGPT. OpenAI plans to start testing ads in ChatGPT for the first time, a major shift in its business strategy as it seeks new ways to increase revenue. The company will begin showing ads in the free version of the chatbot, as well as its cheapest subscription tier called ChatGPT Go. Ads will appear at the bottom of ChatGPT's answers and be labeled. OpenAI's more expensive subscription tiers won't show users ads. Chief Executive Sam Altman has long expressed concerns about introducing ads into ChatGPT, warning that it could erode trust with users if they believe that chatbots' answers are being influenced by advertisers. Ads plus AI is sort of a uniquely unsettling to me, he said at a fireside chat at Harvard University 2 years ago. I kind of think ads is a last resort for us as a business model, but OpenAI needs new ways to power its stratospheric growth and diversify its revenue beyond selling ChatGPT subscriptions to users. OpenAI has committed to spending hundreds of billions of dollars in computing power over the coming years, which Altman has said will be funded mostly through future sales. The company said ads wouldn't influence the chatbot's answers and user conversations wouldn't be sold to advertisers. OpenAI said that it wouldn't show ads in response to sensitive topics such as politics and mental health. Users will also have the option to turn off personalization for ads, and they won't be shown to those under the age of 18. OpenAI declared a code red in December after a surprising success and growth of Google's Gemini chatbot. As part of the company-wide effort, Altman said that OpenAI needed to do a better job improving the core ChatGPT experience, including by responding to users more quickly and delivering more personalized answers. In launching ads, the company will have to strike a delicate balance between introducing a potentially lucrative new business without upsetting its users. The company says it hopes ads will help people discover new products and services through the chatbot and will adjust its approach based on people's feedback. The initiative is being led by Fiji Simo, OpenAI's CEO of applications, who was widely praised by investors for successfully introducing ads into the grocery delivery app Instacart when she was its chief executive. News Corp, owner of the Wall Street Journal, has a content licensing partnership with OpenAI. And Walmart reshapes leadership team as new CEO prepares to take over. Walmart will reshuffle its leadership team when John Furner takes over as chief executive next month, elevating a group of longtime executives as the retailer navigates a complex consumer and government landscape. David Guggins will become chief executive of Walmart U.S. as Furner leaves the role. That puts Gugina, the company's current chief e-commerce officer, at the helm of the retailer's large business unit, which employs around 1.5 million workers. Walmart said in a statement that Gugina's background in e-commerce and supply chain operation positions him to continue expanding delivery and digital services. Chris Nicholas, currently the head of Sam's Club U.S., will succeed Kath McClay as chief executive of Walmart's international division. McClay was seen as a possible successor to departing chief executive Doug McMillon before Furner got the job. She plans to exit from the role at the end of the month. Nicholas has held several leadership positions across the company, including chief executive officer of Walmart U.S. and finance chief of both Walmart U.S. and Walmart International. Latrice Watkins, currently Walmart U.S.'s chief merchandising officer, will take over as chief executive of Sam's Club. In addition, Seth Dallaire will become Chief Growth Officer for all of Walmart, including global operations. He most recently served as Chief Growth Officer for Walmart US. A host of other executives will shift roles internationally as leadership changes, including a new Walmart US Chief Merchant and e-commerce head. As AI rapidly reshapes retail, we are centralizing our platforms to accelerate shared capabilities, freeing up our operating segments to be more focused on and closer to our customers and members, said Werner. And Beyond Meat looks at protein beverages to help boost growth. Beyond Meat, whose sale of plant-based beef, chicken, and pork have been declining along with consumer interest in the category, is introducing a line of protein drinks it hopes will go down more smoothly. Skinny cans of the fruit-flavored carbonated Beyond Immerse are now for sale by Test Kitchen, announced by the company last fall to offer new products in limited quantities. Whether the expansion into a hot but competitive arena can reverse Beyond Meat's steady drift into meme stock territory is another question. The biggest challenges may lie in asking consumers to make a leap from a brand associated with chewy, savory meals and sustainability to a product more suited for on-the-go sustenance or post-working out recovery, and that has nothing to do with meat alternatives, said Savannah Way, Associate Professor of Marketing at Santa Clara University's Levy School of Business. One factor in Beyond Meat's favor is that the beverages themselves are unlike the dense, calorie-heavy shakes that dominate the protein beverage market, according to Tim Calkins, a marketing professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. People don't picture carbonated water when they think of protein drinks, Calkins said. That's a different proposition. The test and learn approach of making the beverages available on Beyond Meat's site for a limited time also reduces the financial risks of bringing new products to the market, he said. But even if the drinks prove popular, any effort to distribute them on a wide scale would likely be challenging for a company focused on reducing costs. Beyond Meat's losses widened in the most recent quarter to $110.7 million from $26.6 million a year ago. And Mitsubishi to boost natural gas business in $5.2 billion deal. Mitsubishi has agreed to acquire Athon's shale gas assets in Texas and Louisiana for $5.2 billion, its biggest acquisition ever. The Japanese trading house said Friday that Athon's natural gas is currently sold in the southern U.S. market, and that the company is considering exporting parts of the production as liquefied natural gas to Asia, including Japan and Europe. The deal comes as President Trump has sought to shore up the U.S. manufacturing base and increase energy exports. Mitsubishi said the investment would strengthen its natural gas business as well as accelerate its efforts to build a value chain in the U.S. ranging from upstream gas development to power generation, data center development, chemicals production, and other related businesses. The Japanese company said Athon's shale gas assets produce about 2.1 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas, equivalent to about 15 million tons of LNG each year. Mitsubishi said it would buy equity interests in Athon from Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, Redbird Capital Partners, and Athon Energy Management. And finally, Activision probed in Italy over its in-game purchases. Italy's competition regulator is investigating Microsoft's Activision Blizzard, saying the U.S. gaming publisher might be misleading consumers through its popular games Diablo Immortal and Call of Duty Mobile. The Italian Competition Authority, or AGCM, said Friday that Activision, acquired by Microsoft in 2023 for $75 billion, might have breached Italian consumer protection laws by using misleading and aggressive practices to nudge users to play more often, extend their gaming sessions, and take up promoted offers. It said that games are described as free to play but still offer in-game purchase. Neither Microsoft nor Activision Blizzard immediately responded to requests for comment. The investigation will focus on repeated prompts that urge users not to miss out on rewards or purchase time-limited offers, the watchdog said. These practices, together with strategies that make it difficult for users to understand the real value of the virtual currency used in the game and the sale of in-game currency in bundles, may influence players as consumers, including minors. And they added that it can lead players to spend significant sums without being fully aware of the real costs. The watchdog said parental controls for the games appear to default to a less restrictive version that enables minors to make in-game purchases. The AGCM said it would also look at how the game asks for consent for personal data processing and whether gamers get enough information about their contractual rights. Microsoft faced a rocky regulatory process when it bought Activision as global merger watchdogs screened the deal for potential competition issues. The transaction was cleared by the European Commission, which investigates multinational corporations' multi-billion euro transactions after the company offered to license Activision games to rival platforms for 10 years and let users stream Activision games through rival cloud services. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 17th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Elaine. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have